The phone buzzed once, then went silent. I stood in my Asheville kitchen stirring a pot of soup while the screen lit with a message from the family chat, or what used to be the family chat. Harwell family dinner. Tonight at Magnolia table, so excited. Photos began to roll in. Evan in a navy jacket, Tara with a glass held high, Mia in a sparkly dress trying to copy her mother's smile. The chandeliers washed everything in honey-colored light. I blinked and searched for my name. It was not there. When I tapped the thread, a small line told the story with fewer words than any apology ever could. You were removed from the group. My hand paused over the wooden spoon. It was not the soup cooling that gave me a chill. It was the quiet that followed. Funny thing about silence, it can be louder than any toast. I have been the one who kept the numbers and the peace in this family for most of my life. 35 years balancing ledgers by day and family dinners by night. Roast chicken, apple pie, birthday candles, and receipts neatly tucked into envelopes with dates in the corner. When Evan and Tara were too tired to cook, I would send over a casserole and a bag of groceries. When a bill slipped through the cracks, I would slide my card across the table with a smile and say, "We will settle up later." Later rarely arrived. I told myself this was love. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also a habit, and habits can turn generous people into background furniture. Tonight the photos kept coming. Champagne flutes clinked. Tara typed grateful for family, and a cascade of hearts and confetti covered the faces that used to crowd around my table. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto the counter and looked at me with that flat, feline judgment that says everything without risking a single word. "At least you are consistent," I told him, and scratched his ear. He flicked his tail and found the warmest square of counter to occupy like a small gray king. I set the phone down and opened the drawer where I keep old receipts and birthday cards, and the last letter my husband wrote before he passed in 2018. The habits of a bookkeeper do not retire. They simply move into a quieter office. There were slips from Thanksgivings, the bill from Evan and Tara's wedding that I paid in full, the invoice for the laptop I gifted when Evan started his new job, little notes I leave myself, so I remember what mattered and what it cost. I am not talking only about money. I am talking about the price of peace, the kind you pay with time and patience. A ping sounded then, another, and I let them pass. I stirred the soup, tasted it then, forgot to turn down the flame because my mind was counting something else. The moments I had been edited out with a smile. The day Mia's recital photos hit the chat while I waited in my good shoes at a back door that never opened. The Sunday I showed up with a pumpkin pie and found the porch dark and the patio behind the fence glowing like a small city. "Sorry, we thought you were resting," Tara had said later, full of sunshine and not an ounce of weight. People can erase you with courtesy, so light it floats. The phone rang at 8:43. Not a chat this time, a call. Tara's name filled the screen. I considered letting it ring, then picked up because old habits and mothers both answer when the house is on fire. "Hello," I said. The sound of a violin leaked through the speaker, along with laughter and the soft drag of plates. Tara's voice came clear, quick and clipped. "Lydia, they just brought the bill. $6,800. Could you take care of it like usual?" Like usual. The words landed with the same tidy certainty as a total on a calculator tape. I looked at the soup now bubbling too hard. I looked at the cat cleaning one paw with grave attention. I looked at the drawer with its layered paper proof that I had been the soft place to land for a very long time. 6,800. A number, a dinner, a pattern. I remembered the way my card had appeared at birthdays before anyone else reached for a wallet, the way thank you had slowly shortened into a smile, then into nothing at all. Something shifted, not a flare of anger, more like the soft click a lock makes when it finally finds the right key. I lifted the phone to my mouth and let the decision shape my voice. "Like usual," I said, and heard how steady I sounded. "Not tonight." There was a pause long enough for me to turn off the stove and set the spoon aside. Before she could pour more words into the space, I ended the call. The kitchen fell quiet again, but the quiet felt full. I pulled a clean notebook from the shelf, the one I keep for personal accounts that only I need to see. On the first page, I wrote a single line in neat letters, 6,800 unpaid lesson pending. I underlined it once because the truth did not need decoration. Then I closed the book, put the soup on a cool burner, and let the night stretch out like a clean ledger waiting for new entries. The phone buzzed once, then went silent. I stood in my Asheville kitchen stirring a pot of soup while the screen lit with a message from the family chat, or what used to be the family chat. Harwell family dinner tonight at Magnolia table, so excited. Photos began to roll in. Evan in a navy jacket, Tara with a glass held high, Mia in a sparkly dress trying to copy her mother's smile. The chandeliers washed everything in honey-colored light. I blinked and searched for my name. It was not there. When I tapped the thread, a small line told the story with fewer words than any apology ever could. You were removed from the group. My hand paused over the wooden spoon. It was not the soup cooling that gave me a chill. It was the quiet that followed. Funny thing about silence, it can be louder than any toast. I have been the one who kept the numbers and the peace in this family for most of my life. 35 years balancing ledgers by day and family dinners by night. Roast chicken, apple pie, birthday candles, and receipts neatly tucked into envelopes with dates in the corner. When Evan and Tara were too tired to cook, I would send over a casserole and a bag of groceries. When a bill slipped through the cracks, I would slide my card across the table with a smile and say, "We will settle up later." Later rarely arrived. I told myself this was love. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also a habit, and habits can turn generous people into background furniture. Tonight the photos kept coming. Champagne flutes clinked, Tara typed grateful for family, and a cascade of hearts and confetti covered the faces that used to crowd around my table. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto the counter and looked at me with that flat feline judgment that says everything without risking a single word. "At least you are consistent," I told him, and scratched his ear. He flicked his tail and found the warmest square of counter to occupy like a small gray king. I set the phone down and opened the drawer where I keep old receipts and birthday cards and the last letter my husband wrote before he passed in 2018. The habits of a bookkeeper do not retire, they simply move into a quieter office. There were slips from Thanksgivings, the bill from Evan and Tara's wedding that I paid in full, the invoice for the laptop I gifted when Evan started his new job, little notes. I leave myself, so I remember what mattered and what it cost. I am not talking only about money. I am talking about the price of peace, the kind you pay with time and patience. A ping sounded then, another, and I let them pass. I stirred the soup, tasted it then, forgot to turn down the flame because my mind was counting something else. The moments I had been edited out with a smile. The day Mia's recital photos hit the chat while I waited in my good shoes at a back door that never opened. The Sunday I showed up with a pumpkin pie and found the porch dark and the patio behind the fence glowing like a small city. "Sorry we thought you were resting," Tara had said later, full of sunshine and not an ounce of weight. People can erase you with courtesy, so light it floats. The phone rang at 8:43. Not a chat this time, a call. Tara's name filled the screen. I considered letting it ring, then picked up because old habits and mothers both answer when the house is on fire. "Hello," I said. The sound of a violin leaked through the speaker, along with laughter and the soft drag of plates. Tara's voice came clear, quick and clipped. "Lydia, they just brought the bill. 6,800. Could you take care of it like usual?" "Like usual." The words landed with the same tidy certainty as a total on a calculator tape. I looked at the soup now bubbling too hard. I looked at the cat cleaning one paw with grave attention. I looked at the drawer with its layered paper proof that I had been the soft place to land for a very long time. 6,800. A number, a dinner, a pattern. I remembered the way my card had appeared at birthdays, before anyone else reached for a wallet, the way thank you had slowly shortened into a smile, then into nothing at all. Something shifted, not a flare of anger, more like the soft click a lock makes when it finally finds the right key. I lifted the phone to my mouth and let the decision shape my voice. Like usual, I said, and heard how steady I sounded. Not tonight. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. The silence that followed was longer than it should have been. I ended the call. The kitchen fell quiet again, but the quiet felt full. I pulled a clean notebook from the shelf, the one I keep for personal accounts, that only I need to see. On the first page, I wrote a single line in neat letters. 6,800 unpaid lesson pending. I underlined it once because the truth did not need decoration. Then I closed the book, turned off the stove, and let the night stretch out like a clean ledger waiting for new entries. Numbers never lie. People do. That used to be my quiet joke every time someone at the office tried to slip an expense past me. For 35 years, I worked as a bookkeeper at a small firm in Asheville, handling everything from payroll to tax season meltdowns. There was comfort in balance sheets because they had rules. Two sides that always had to match. Life, I learned, is not as disciplined. When my husband passed in 2018, the house fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my cat's claws clicking across the tile. I kept the same routines because stopping would mean admitting something had ended. Sunday dinners were my way of keeping the ledger of family open. I roasted chicken mashed potatoes, sometimes pot roast when the weather was cold. Evan came with a bottle of wine and a story about work. Tara came with her phone and a camera ready to post a picture of the table before anyone could eat. It was fine, or maybe it was polite. The difference can be hard to spot when you are trying to stay useful. When Evan told me he and Tara were planning a wedding, I offered to help. Help turned into handle. I paid the florist, the caterer, the venue deposit. $27,000 by the time the last bill cleared. Evan hugged me. Tara smiled wide enough for her cheeks to ache, and I told myself it was worth it. You cannot put a price on family, people say, though. I have always suspected they say that because they have never had to pay the invoice. After the wedding, my house became the backup storage for what Tara called their minimal life. Boxes of glassware, a stand mixer, leftover favors. They were building something modern, she said. Brunches instead of suppers, yoga on Saturdays, everything organic and documented. We went from face-to-face to FaceTime, from hugs at the door to heart emojis in a chat thread. At first, I tried to join in. I learned how to send pictures of my garden, how to reply with little digital thumbs. I even suggested recipes. Then one day, the notifications simply stopped. I thought maybe they were busy. People get busy. Life gets loud. It did not occur to me that I had been moved from center to corner until the quiet became too symmetrical to ignore. Once I stopped by with a pot of stew because the weather had turned cold. Tara opened the door in a white robe, all smiles, and said they had already eaten. I stood there, holding the pot, while the smell of roasted salmon drifted past her shoulder. She said something about meal prep and clean eating and promised to stop by later for tea. She never did. I began to collect these small moments the way I used to collect receipts. Not for revenge, for record keeping. Because every story makes more sense when you see the totals. The humor helped. Humor was the only line item that balanced pain. I remember one afternoon a few months before the dinner at Magnolia Table when I brought them a stack of Costco coupons. You could get organic olive oil in bulk for half the price, I told her. Tara smiled like I had just suggested we churn our own butter. "Oh, Lydia," she said, "we only shop at Whole Foods." I nodded and slipped the coupons back into my purse. Apparently, gratitude isn't organic anymore. It was one of those lines that sound like a joke until you hear yourself say it twice. That night, I wrote it down in my ledger under a new column labeled Reminders. In that same book, I recorded things like what time Evan called and when he did not, what gifts were given, what thank yous arrived late or not at all. Some people journal. I reconcile. It keeps the heart from overdrafting. There were still good moments. Movie nights when Mia would sit beside me and eat popcorn until her fingers were slick with butter. Mother's Day brunches where Evan would pull out my chair before Tara reminded him they were running late for their next appointment. Life is not all cruelty. It is just that kindness ages faster when it is one-sided. Still, I kept cooking. I kept showing up. Because that is what mothers do when they are afraid that if they stop, the whole equation will collapse. I never complained, not out loud. Numbers never lie, but people do, especially when they say they are fine. I was fine the way a table is fine with one leg shorter than the rest. It wobbles, but you learn to eat around it. The thing about being the one who balances everything is that no one notices until you stop. I was the accountant of birthdays, the treasurer of forgiveness, the quiet investor in everyone else's comfort. It is a noble title that comes without salary or thanks. Sometimes I wondered if my husband would have told me to stop. He used to say, "You cannot audit love." Maybe not. But you can know when the math no longer makes sense. When they started sharing pictures of dinners I had not been invited to, I stopped checking my phone before bed. I watched old shows instead, the kind with canned laughter that never changes. It helped fill the quiet. Still, there was that part of me, the professional part, that could not help but keep count. Every kindness is a number. Every silence is too. The birthday candles flickered on my phone screen, 12 tiny flames for a girl who still called me Grandma Lydia when no one else was listening. I was sitting on my couch wearing the sweater Mia had once said made me look like a cloud when the notification popped up. Tara Harwell is live. I tapped it without thinking. The screen filled with a pastel banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Mia," in letters so large they almost covered the child herself. There were balloons, a unicorn cake, and a crowd of parents laughing off camera. I turned up the volume and heard Tara's bright voice carry across the speakers. She was saying how proud she was to bake the cake from scratch. I tilted my head, smiling at the screen because I recognized the pattern of the frosting, the way the layers leaned slightly left. "Oh, that is my recipe," I whispered. Funny, no credit. I typed a simple comment. "Looks lovely." Within seconds, it vanished. I refreshed the feed. Nothing. I tried again, smaller this time, just a heart emoji. Deleted again. My phone vibrated moments later with a text from Evan. "Mom Tara just wants a drama-free day." I stared at the words. Drama-free. I had not said anything dramatic since 1994, and that was to a tax auditor. Still, I replied with a thumbs up because that is what you send when you have no words left that will be heard. I set the phone down and looked at the small gift bag on my coffee table. Inside was the charm bracelet I had ordered for Mia last week. Tiny silver letters spelled out her name, along with a unicorn charm. I had planned to bring it to the party, had even wrapped it in paper with stars. Now it sat like an unopened account, waiting for a signature that would never come. I opened my ledger, the one I had started after the group chat incident, and wrote in neat script, "Gift given patience, return deletion." I underlined both words once, not from anger, but from accuracy. The numbers always mattered less than the notes beside them. Later that evening, I scrolled through the photos Tara had posted from the party. Every detail was perfect down to the paper straws and matching napkins. It must have cost a fortune. My curiosity, the same instinct that once made me a decent accountant, nudged me to check my own Amazon account. I had noticed the monthly bill seemed higher, though I assumed it was just the usual household odds and ends. When I opened the order history, my cursor froze. There they were. Unicorn cake toppers, pastel streamers, 24 gift bags, candles shaped like clouds, and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Princess." Total $482. The shipping address was theirs. The payment method was mine. My Prime membership was invited, apparently, even if I was not. I sat back in my chair and laughed, a quiet sound that did not quite reach the air. Humor helps keep the blood pressure in range. I imagined Tara clicking through her list, using my account like a shared wallet, humming as she built the perfect Instagram moment. Maybe she thought I would never notice. Maybe she did not care if I did. Either way, the efficiency was impressive. A woman who can delete a comment in 5 seconds will certainly not waste time on remorse. I considered calling Evan but decided against it. Numbers speak louder than arguments. I added a new line to the ledger. Expense $482. Memo Prime membership apparently comes with selective invitations. I closed the book and made tea. The steam rose slowly, curling like thought itself. I looked around my small kitchen. Everything in its place, every bill paid, every dish clean. There is a kind of loneliness that smells like order. It arrives when you realize the people you raised now measure love in convenience. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Mia's face on the screen, her eyes bright, her smile wide as she leaned over the cake I had once baked with her on my lap. I remembered her small hands covered in flour, her giggle when she said the word whisk. Those memories felt like investments that had stopped earning interest. The next morning, my inbox pinged with a delivery confirmation. The last of the birthday supplies had arrived. Tara had used one-day shipping, efficient as always. I clicked through the receipt, scanned the list, and felt a flicker of something between sadness and relief. Sadness because I had let them use me like a line of credit for affection. Relief because now I could see the ledger clearly. Every kindness has its cost, and mine had been itemized. At work, I used to remind clients that reconciliation is not revenge. It is simply truth made visible. So I reconciled. I balanced. I took out my calculator, wrote the total on a sticky note, and placed it under a small magnet on the fridge. Not as a threat, as a reminder that love, like bookkeeping, needs accountability. In the afternoon, Evan called. He wanted to make sure I had seen the photos. They turned out so good, he said Tara worked really hard. I told him I saw them, that the cake was perfect. He sighed with relief. See, Mom, everything's fine. I smiled, though he could not see it. Everything is balanced, I said. He laughed, not catching the tone. I looked at the ledger again and whispered to myself, apparently my Prime membership was invited. I wasn't. The line made me laugh for real this time, the kind of laugh that shakes off something heavy. Maybe that was my birthday gift to my self-clarity. I wrote one last line before closing the book. Kindness extended infinite. Interest accrued overdue. When kindness becomes a transaction, balance it. The bank statement arrived on a mild Thursday morning, folded neatly in the mailbox, between a grocery flyer and an invitation to join a retirement seminar I had no interest in. I almost tossed it aside with the rest of the mail until I noticed a new page tucked in the middle. The numbers were printed in black ink, calm and factual, and yet one line pulsed louder than any siren. Magnolia Table, Asheville, $6,800. The description read, Harwell Reservation. My name was on the account, but not on the table. I stared at it long enough for the steam from my coffee to fade. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a duplicate charge or a system glitch. But the date matched perfectly with the night of the dinner, the night Tara's voice had sliced through my kitchen, asking for a favor she called usual. I looked closer at the details and noticed something that made the room tilt slightly. The payment had been attempted 3 times, each authorization denied. I could almost see it happen. Tara at the restaurant swiping my card, frowning when it failed, whispering to the waiter that there must be some confusion. I imagined Evan looking away, pretending not to hear. Family reunion, I read again, because that was what the restaurant note described it as. They had not just gone out for dinner. They had gathered both sides of the family, grandparents from Raleigh, cousins from Atlanta, even an old neighbor I had not seen since Evan's high school graduation. Everyone except me. I leaned back in my chair and laughed, though the sound came out thin. The kind of laugh people mistake for calm when it is really disbelief trying to find an exit. I picked up the phone and called the bank. After a series of polite hold tones and a recorded voice thanking me for my patience, a young man finally answered. His name was Justin. He sounded cheerful in the way people do before they realize what they are about to hear. I explained that a charge of $6,800 appeared under my account for a reservation I had not made. He paused and clicked his keyboard. Wait, he said they tried to run that card 3 times in the last hour. Would you like us to block it?" I smiled, even though he could not see me. Seems I am still part of the family financially, at least. He laughed awkwardly, probably unsure if it was a joke. "Please block it," I said, "and issue a new card." He asked if I wanted to dispute the charge. Not yet, I told him I prefer to keep the evidence clean. After the call ended, I sat quietly, feeling the house hum around me. There was something strangely liberating about confirmation. Suspicion is messy, proof is clean. I opened the drawer where I kept my printer paper, slid in a sheet, and printed the statement. The numbers came out in tidy rows, innocent little soldiers of truth. I took my red pen, the one I used for taxes, and drew a single line under the amount, $6,800, unpaid. The ink bled slightly, the red standing out against the white like a warning flare. My husband used to say that numbers tell you what people are too polite to admit. He was right. I could see the entire history of our family's dynamics summarized in one line item. Dependence disguised as affection, generosity mistaken for duty. Every charge on that page had a story. The toy store purchase when Mia was sick. The last-minute flower order Tara forgot for her own anniversary. The weekend hotel booking in Charleston when Evan promised they would pay me back. They never did. I kept thinking of the phrase family reunion. I wondered who had chosen it. Maybe the restaurant used it for large gatherings. Maybe Tara wrote it herself while making the reservation a little flourish of ownership. It stung in the strangest way. I had been erased from the living memory of my family, but preserved in the financial one, still attached by the digits on a plastic card. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stared at the ledger on the table. It had started as a way to understand, but it was becoming something else, something with edges. I flipped to a new page and titled it simply, Current Liabilities. Beneath it, I wrote in small letters, Emotional Debt Overdue. I thought of calling Evan, but knew what he would say. "Mom, it was a misunderstanding. Tara did not mean to. It was just a mix-up." He had learned to soften every confrontation until the truth lost all texture. I decided to skip that performance. The truth did not need rehearsal. The day passed quietly, broken only by the rhythm of the printer, spitting out copies of every statement from the last 6 months. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces, tracing the rise of generosity and the decline of respect. The correlation was exact. By late afternoon, the sun hit the window just right, and I could see the faint reflection of myself in the glass, holding a red pen like a gavel. I smiled at the absurdity of it all. Dinners, birthdays, gifts, and still somehow I was the one footing the bill for togetherness. There was humor in that, if you tilted your head the right way, a kind of comedy that sits too close to truth. I took the final printed page, placed it in a clear folder, and labeled it Magnolia. Then I wrote one more line at the bottom of the ledger. Investigation ongoing. Numbers do not lie, but they do expose. Planning revenge is not always about fury. Sometimes it is about precision. The morning after I printed the statements, I sat at the kitchen table with my ledger open, a cup of chamomile steaming beside it, and the soft sound of an online yoga class playing through my laptop speakers. The instructor's voice was calm, the kind that makes you believe in forgiveness until she says something like, "Release your anger." I smiled and picked up my pen. On the margin of the ledger, I wrote to be released soon. I held the stretch longer than I should have, feeling a satisfying pull in my spine. Anger, like muscles, needs control before it becomes strength. When the class ended, I closed the laptop and looked at the stack of papers spread across the table. Every line, every receipt, every deletion from my life had found its way into these pages. It was not vengeance I was planning. It was balance. Justice has its own kind of math. I started by calling Magnolia Table. The hostess recognized my name, her voice polite but uncertain. I asked about a reservation under Harwell and confirmed the details. Saturday, 7:30, private dining room, 42 guests. I thanked her and asked if I could add one more. There was a pause followed by a cheerful, "Of course." "Would you like me to note the payment method?" "Not yet," I said. "That part will be handled in person." I could almost hear her smile through the phone, unaware of the small storm already forming. Later that afternoon, I wrote a message in the family chat that I had been removed from weeks ago. Or rather, I recreated it. Technology is simple when you work with numbers for decades. One email alias a copied link, and there I was again. I typed, "Thank you for the invitation. I'll see you there." The response came faster than I expected. "Tara, it's just immediate family." I let the silence linger for a moment before replying. "Then you'll see how immediate money can be." She did not answer after that, but I knew she had read it. The little seen notification blinked and vanished. I pictured her pacing, maybe calling Evan, asking what I meant. Let her wonder. Let her sit with the discomfort of not knowing. It was a currency she had never learned to handle. The rest of the day unfolded with the same quiet rhythm I used to close accounts. I gathered receipts, printed a clean copy of the ledger, and clipped them into a folder labeled Harwell Reconciliation. I also made a separate list titled Courtesy Expenses. It included every gift, every bailout, every unnoticed kindness I had provided over the years. The total was larger than I wanted to admit. I wrote the final number on the top line and circled it twice. People forget that generosity is an investment. It only looks effortless when someone else is paying the interest. Around evening, I walked into the living room and opened the curtains. The Asheville sunset poured through pink and gold, the same colors Tara had chosen for her wedding flowers. I wondered if she still remembered that I had arranged those centerpieces myself when the florist canceled last minute. I doubted it. Memory tends to favor convenience over truth. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto the windowsill and gave me a look that said, "Everything and nothing." "You think I'm going too far?" I asked. He blinked slowly, which I decided meant proceed. Before bed, I logged into my online banking account. There it was again, the charge to Magnolia Table still pending, still unpaid. I clicked the transfer option and typed in the restaurant's account number. For the amount I entered, 0.01, 1 cent. In the memo line, I wrote lesson deposit. Then I hit send. The transaction processed instantly. I imagined the confusion when it appeared on their statement the next day, a symbolic down payment on accountability. I closed the browser, feeling lighter. The next morning, Evan called. His tone was careful, the same tone he used when trying to sell me reassurance. "Mom," he said, "Tara told me you might be planning to come to the dinner. She just doesn't want any tension. It's supposed to be a positive night. For everyone." I took a sip of coffee. Then she should not have used my name for the reservation. There was silence. I could hear him exhale. "I will handle it," he said. "I am sure it was just a misunderstanding." I smiled, even though he could not see me. "That's fine, Evan. I will handle it too." When the call ended, I reopened the ledger and added a new entry. Apology anticipated 0. Resolution expected full. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing those words side by side. They made sense in a way emotions never did. Over the next few days, I prepared quietly. I pressed my best navy coat, the one with silver buttons that caught the light. I cleaned my glasses and polished my shoes. Revenge like accounting requires presentation. I even stopped by the florist, not for flowers, but for a blank thank you card. I wrote inside, "Thank you for teaching me the value of limits. Sincerely, Lydia." I tucked it into the folder with the receipts. On Friday night, I treated myself to a glass of wine and watched a rerun of The Golden Girls. Dorothy said something about karma being a boomerang, and I laughed out loud. It felt like a sign. When Saturday arrived, I woke early, baked a small batch of cookies, and packaged them neatly for the staff at Magnolia Table. They had no idea what storm was coming, and I believed good people deserved sweetness before chaos. At 6:30, I dressed, pinned my hair back, and took one last look at my reflection. Calm, steady. Not angry, just precise. Before leaving, I wrote one final note in the ledger, to be released tonight. I closed the book, slipped it into my bag, and walked out into the evening air. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting a soft glow across the pavement. Somewhere downtown, a restaurant awaited with its pending bill and its uninvited guest. Stay till the dinner. I told myself that's where the bill gets served. The night air in Asheville had that crisp edge of early spring, the kind that carries the scent of wet pavement and magnolia blossoms. I walked toward Magnolia Table with slow, deliberate steps, my navy coat buttoned neatly, the old leather wallet resting in my hand like a relic of another life. Inside it was my new card pristine, an unused, a quiet symbol that the ledger had shifted. The restaurant glowed from within, gold light spilling through glass panels, laughter rising like music. I paused at the entrance, taking one last breath to steady myself. The hostess greeted me with a polite smile, her eyes flicking to the reservation list. "Name, please," she asked. "Harwell," I replied. There was a pause, then recognition. "Ah, yes, the private room. Let me show you in." Her voice trembled slightly, perhaps sensing the calm precision that follows storms. The corridor opened into the main dining area, and there they were, 40-something faces turned toward a long table adorned with candles and flowers. At the center sat Tara, radiant under the lights, her laughter freezing mid-note the moment she saw me. Evan followed her gaze, his expression collapsing from surprise to disbelief. "Mom," he started, but I raised a hand. "Not tonight." I turned to the nearest waiter, a young man with kind eyes and the reflexive politeness of someone new to service. "Someone's been using my name to pay," I said gently. "Let's correct that." He blinked, unsure, then nodded and disappeared to fetch the manager. Tara stood halfway, her voice trembling between confusion and defense. "Lydia, this is a private family dinner." I smiled, soft but steady. "Then it is fitting I am here. I am family." She tried again, the words tripping over themselves. It was a misunderstanding we were going to. I held up the red folder in my hand, the one labeled Magnolia. "I believe the misunderstanding is about $6,800 wide." The waiter returned with a silver tray and the printed bill. He handed it to me with a cautious bow. I thanked him and placed it flat on the table, the paper gleaming under the candles. "Let's see what we are celebrating," I said, flipping through the pages. Lobster tail, 12 servings, 3 bottles of Merlot imported, a dessert tower. I paused, glancing up at Tara's pale face. Noted. A ripple of nervous laughter moved down the table, the kind that fills silence when people do not know where to look. Even the staff hesitated, hovering at the edges of the scene, like witnesses unsure whether to intervene. I turned to the waiter. "Tell me who authorized this payment." He hesitated, eyes darting to Tara. She cleared her throat. "It was supposed to go through your card," she said, her tone shrinking with each word. "I see," I replied and tapped the bill once with my pen. "Then let's settle it properly." I took the pen from my pocket and wrote across the top in neat, bold letters, "Declined." Then I looked at Tara, calm as the balance line at the end of a long audit. "You eat like royalty," I said, "now pay like reality." Someone in the back chuckled, trying to smother it with a cough. The sound caught on others, and soon a few guests near the bar smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of that involuntary delight that arrives when truth finally makes itself known. The waiter, trying to maintain composure, asked, "So who will be paying tonight?" I closed the folder and said, "Justice will." The laughter that followed was soft but unmistakable. Even the bartender grinned. Tara's face burned crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she could not decide which apology might survive the air. Evan rubbed a hand over his face, the gesture of a man realizing the math no longer favors him. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence weigh itself against the laughter. Then I reached into my wallet and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single penny, taped neatly to a note. I handed it to the manager. "This is the lesson deposit," I said. "Please make sure it is recorded." He looked puzzled, but nodded respectfully. I thanked him and turned to leave. Tara's voice followed sharp with embarrassment. "You didn't have to humiliate us." I stopped at the doorway and turned back, my tone measured. "No, Tara, I didn't have to. But you did, Every action writes its own receipt. Tonight, I am just collecting." The room stayed silent except for the faint clink of cutlery from a distant table. I nodded once to the waiter and started toward the exit. As I passed the bar, an older couple raised their glasses slightly, a small salute of approval. I smiled, the first genuine smile I had felt in months. Outside, the night had cooled. The magnolia trees along the sidewalk shimmered in the streetlight. I walked slowly to my car, the echo of my steps steady and calm. There was no anger left, only arithmetic. Inside the folder, the bill remained unpaid, but the balance was settled. Ever watched karma arrive between appetizers and dessert? By morning, the town had already turned my quiet act into folklore. The video surfaced first on TikTok, shaky, but clear enough to catch the entire exchange under the golden light of Magnolia Table. The caption read, "Mother-in-law shuts down family dinner bill," and the comments multiplied faster than receipts on tax day. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing endlessly across the kitchen counter. Messages from old coworkers, neighbors, even my former book club friends who hadn't texted me in years. "You're famous, Lydia." The one from Pam simply said, "Respectfully, iconic." I poured myself a cup of tea and let the notifications pile up like fallen leaves. I had no interest in explaining myself to the internet. Justice needs no interview. By 9, the local Asheville radio station mentioned it between weather updates. A caller described it as the most satisfying thing she had ever watched. Another said she wished she had the courage to do the same at her family's Thanksgiving. I smiled and stirred my tea. Maybe catharsis was contagious. When I stepped outside to buy groceries, the air felt lighter, the kind of air that knows a secret. The cashier at the corner store looked up as I approached and grinned. "Ma'am, you're a legend." I raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" He nodded eagerly. "That video has 1 million views. My grandma sent it to me this morning. Said she wants to be like you when she grows up." I laughed, handed him a $5, and told him to keep the change. Outside the store, a man unloading boxes stopped me to ask if I really said pay like reality. I told him yes, and he slapped his knee, laughing. Best line I've heard all year. The absurdity of it all almost made me dizzy. A woman spends a lifetime being invisible, and then one night of boundaries turns her into a viral moment. Fame by accident, redemption by proof. I carried my grocery bag home, humming under my breath. On the porch lay a bouquet of fresh tulips wrapped in brown paper. The card attached read, "From an anonymous admirer." Underneath, in tidy handwriting, was a single phrase, "Respectfully unpaid." I chuckled so hard I nearly dropped the bag. Mr. Whiskers rubbed against my leg, unimpressed as usual. I placed the flowers in a vase and returned to the kitchen. The phone kept buzzing, not from strangers this time, but from people who mattered. Evan's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was tired, almost hollow. "Mom?" He said, "It's everywhere." My boss asked if I was the son in that video. I told him it was exaggerated. He didn't believe me. He sighed. "Tara's friends have started avoiding her. She's devastated." I took a slow sip of tea. "Consequences have their own way of arriving," I said. "Maybe now you understand that respect has interest rates too." He was silent for a moment. I could hear distant traffic through the phone. "We made a mistake," he finally said. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Growth often looks like embarrassment first. When the call ended, I turned on the television. Judge Judy was scolding someone about unpaid debts. The irony made me laugh. I settled into the couch, the cat curled beside me, the flowers bright against the window light. The laughter on the show echoed faintly through the house. Outside, a delivery truck passed the driver, slowing down just enough to wave. I waved back, amused. The world had found humor in what had once been my humiliation. Maybe that was the real balance I had been searching for. By afternoon, a small article appeared on the Asheville Gazette website. It described the event as a graceful act of accountability that turned dinner into a masterclass on self-respect. The writer ended with a line that made me smile. The woman didn't raise her voice. She raised her standards. I printed the article and slipped it into my ledger. Under the latest entry, I wrote in neat ink, "Public opinion settled." Around evening, a knock came at the door. My neighbor, Clara, stood holding a pie. "I just had to stop by," she said, grinning. "My daughter showed me that video. She said, 'Mom, this is what boundaries look like.'" I thanked her and promised to return the dish later. When she left, I sat with a slice and thought about how strange it was to feel both exposed and peaceful. The internet knew my story, but for once the story had chosen dignity as its ending. Before bed, I checked the ledger again. The pages were full now, each one a piece of proof that silence can roar when timed right. I wrote one last note before closing it. Karma has humor. It just prefers timing. 2 weeks passed before I saw either of them again. The days were quiet, measured by the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Asheville had already moved on to its next piece of gossip, but I knew silence has its own rhythm of return. It was a Sunday afternoon, gray and cool, when I heard the knock at the door. 3 polite taps, hesitant, the kind that belonged to guilt rather than courtesy. I set down my cup of tea and opened it. Tara stood there clutching a bouquet of supermarket flowers, the kind wrapped in crinkled plastic and tied with a limp ribbon. Evan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she offered the flowers forward like a peace treaty she could barely afford. "We're behind on rent," she said softly. "Could you maybe help us this once?" Her voice cracked on the word help. I looked at her carefully, at the thin coat she wore, at the faint exhaustion under her eyes. There was a time I would have stepped aside, made tea, written a check without hesitation. But that version of me existed in the old ledger. I walked back to the table, leaving the door open behind me, and took out the book. Its cover was worn now, edges soft from handling, but the pages inside were immaculate. I flipped to the marked entry. $6,800. Lesson pending. I tapped the line gently. Interest accrued in lessons, I murmured. Evan shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mom," he began, but I raised a hand. "You've said enough." Tara's tears came quietly. Not dramatic, just small drops of sincerity mixed with shame. I did not enjoy the sight. Dignity is not delighting in someone's downfall. It is knowing you can choose grace without surrender. I closed the ledger and looked at them both. "You'll survive," I said simply. I did. The words hung in the air like a bridge they could either cross or ignore. Tara nodded, biting her lip, and set the flowers on the table before turning to leave. Evan hesitated, his voice low. I never wanted it to come to this. I smiled faintly. That's the problem with Comfort Evan. It never announces the bill until it's due. He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, a flicker of understanding maybe. Then he followed her down the steps. Through the window, I watched them walk toward the car, their figures framed by the fading light. It was not triumph, I felt, nor revenge, but something quieter. Closure, perhaps. A lesson completed. I turned back to the table, touched the petals of the cheap flowers, and found myself smiling at their sincerity. There was a certain poetry in it. The woman who once paid for everything now receiving the smallest gesture of repentance. I opened the ledger again and wrote the final line beneath their entry. Debt settled emotionally. Then I closed it for good. The house was silent except for Mr. Whiskers jumping onto the counter. He looked at me, tail flicking as if asking what came next. I poured another cup of tea and whispered, "Balance, that's what comes next." Outside, the sky turned a soft lavender, the color of calm after chaos. I thought about how financial literacy was never really about money. It was about boundaries, about understanding that kindness without limits turns into debt no ledger can record. Sometimes the best revenge is not destruction, but education. I sat there a while longer, the flowers catching the light, the steam rising gently from my cup. The house felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. Eventually I stood, carried the bouquet to the sink, and trimmed the stems before placing them in water. Even wilted flowers deserve a chance to bloom again. The retirement center smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and fresh paint, the kind of place where mornings lingered like polite conversation. Every Thursday, the community hall hosted what they called neighborhood economics, a fancy name for a group of retirees, swapping stories about money mistakes and small victories. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the organizer asked if anyone had a tale about financial lessons, half the room turned toward me with knowing grins. The video had made its way here too, apparently. I stood up, smoothing the front of my cardigan, and said, "Well, mine involves lobster family and a bill that never got paid. That was all it took." The room erupted in laughter before I even reached the good part. I told them about the dinner, the phone call, the ridiculous $600 to $800 tab, and the moment I walked into Magnolia Table like a woman reclaiming her own headline. Every punchline landed with precision. Every pause earned its ripple of chuckles. When I said, "You eat like royalty, pay like reality," someone in the back actually clapped. By the time I finished, the whole room was laughing so hard that the volunteer running the coffee urn had to sit down. One woman wiped tears from her eyes and said between giggles, "We all have a Tara in our family." The words hung there, warm and true. A chorus of agreement followed voices overlapping with knowing sighs. A man near the front leaned forward, raising his cup. "Mine's my nephew," he declared. "Thought my retirement fund was a community project." The laughter came again, lighter this time, shared like dessert among friends. I felt something shift inside me then. For months, I had been the woman who got excluded, humiliated, underestimated. Now I was simply the woman who told a good story with a moral attached. Maybe that was its own kind of redemption. After the laughter died down, an older gentleman approached. He was tall, with neatly combed silver hair and a tie that looked older than both of us combined. He introduced himself as George. "I liked your story," he said, his voice steady and measured like someone who'd spent his life balancing ledgers of his own. "I respect balance sheets and boundaries." The line made me laugh softly. "Then you'll love my kind of interest," I replied. His smile deepened, the kind that hinted at both charm and comprehension. He asked if I'd join him for coffee sometime, purely to talk about numbers, of course. I said I'd think about it, which in retirement terms meant maybe next week. We ended up sitting by the window for the rest of the session, swapping stories about accounting old clients and the strange satisfaction of reconciling a clean ledger. George had once run a small hardware store in town before selling it to a chain. He said he missed the simplicity of seeing balance, of knowing exactly what came in and what went out. I told him I missed that too, though these days I measured wealth in boundaries kept rather than dollars earned. The afternoon drifted by in gentle conversation. Someone passed around cookies, and I took one, noting absently that they tasted better when shared without obligation. Around us, the retirees kept talking. One woman described setting financial limits with her adult children. Another confessed she'd canceled her grown son's gym membership after realizing she'd been paying it for years. It was a chorus of quiet revolutions, one practical act of self-respect at a time. When the session ended, George offered to walk me to my car. As we passed the notice board filled with flyers for art classes and potluck dinners, he said, "I think what you did took courage. Not many people could keep their dignity that sharp under pressure." I smiled at the phrasing. Dignity and pressure, the two constants of my story. Maybe I said, "But it helps when you treat self-respect like compound interest. It grows quietly if you leave it alone long enough." He laughed, holding the door open. "You make it sound mathematical." "Everything is," I replied, "especially balance." Outside, the sun was setting over the parking lot, the light turning the asphalt gold. George paused by my car and said, "Coffee next week." I nodded. "We'll call it a meeting of the board." As I drove home, the laughter from the meeting still echoed in my head. It felt good to be the one laughing again, not bitterly, but with real ease. The road curved past the familiar magnolia trees, and I thought about how different they looked now, not reminders of humiliation, but symbols of change. At home, Mr. Whiskers greeted me with his usual indifference. I placed my bag down and took out the cookie I had saved for later. It crumbled perfectly between my fingers, sweet and simple. I glanced at the ledger on the counter, the final line still visible. Debt settled emotionally. For the first time, I felt no need to add another entry. Instead, I whispered quietly, "Lesson compounded." The air around me felt lighter, the house warmer, and somewhere deep inside, laughter settled into the rhythm of peace. It was late summer when I heard the news, one of those small-town whispers that travels faster than logic. Tara had taken a job at Magnolia Table, not as a manager, not as a hostess, but as an assistant bookkeeper and part-time server. Apparently, the restaurant had admired her event planning skills during that infamous dinner and decided to offer her something steady. I almost laughed when I heard. Life, it seemed, had a remarkable sense of humor and a flawless sense of balance. The very place that had hosted my humiliation was now her classroom for humility. I waited a week before visiting, not out of cruelty, but timing matters when life writes its own punchlines. On a Thursday afternoon, I dressed neatly, put on my pearl earrings, and walked downtown. Magnolia Table looked exactly the same, elegant but slightly smug, like a place unaware it had become a local proverb. Inside, the air smelled of citrus polish and roasted herbs. The hostess greeted me with the same polite smile as before and led me to a small table by the window. I ordered tea and watched the room with quiet amusement. The lunchtime rush moved like a soft hum of conversation and clinking cutlery. Then I saw her. Tara stood near the counter in a simple black apron, her hair pulled back, no trace of the glossy confidence she used to wear like perfume. She was scribbling an order into a notepad, focused, composed, perhaps learning what effort truly costs. When she turned, our eyes met. For a second, everything stopped, the room shrinking into a single thread between us. I could see the flicker of embarrassment, the automatic apology rising behind her eyes. I did not need to hear it. I simply smiled and said, "Make sure you balance every table properly." The words landed softly, not as a jab, but as a mirror. She nodded a tiny gesture of acknowledgement and went back to her work. It was enough. The waiter brought my tea, setting it down with practiced grace. As he poured, he looked at me curiously and asked with a grin, "Would you like the family discount?" I couldn't help it. I laughed, a deep, genuine sound that startled even me. "Oh no," I said, "I paid for that already twice." He laughed too, unaware of the entire story he had just stepped into. The tea was perfect, strong, and fragrant. I sipped slowly, watching Tara deliver plates with quiet efficiency. There was no resentment left in me, only a calm amusement at how life evens its own ledgers. Around me, diners chatted, oblivious to the invisible circle that had just closed. A part of me wanted to leave a generous tip, but another part decided that some balances are best left untouched. Instead, I finished my tea, left exact change, and wrote a single line on the napkin. "Keep learning. Numbers never lie." As I stood to leave, I caught one last glimpse of Tara, wiping a table, her movements deliberate, respectful. It struck me that growth often arrives dressed as consequence. Outside, the sun hung low, casting warm light across the street. I walked slowly, my reflection gliding across the restaurant window, older but lighter somehow. There was poetry in all of it, the kind that doesn't rhyme but satisfies. Justice had come not as punishment but as education. I passed a group of tourists reading the menu outside and heard one of them say, "Isn't this the place from that video?" I smiled to myself and kept walking. The world keeps score in unexpected ways, and sometimes the only thing you have to do is stay long enough to see it balance out. Saturday mornings had always carried a kind of quiet magic in Asheville, that soft blend of sunlight and birdsong that made even the most ordinary breakfast feel sacred. I was setting the table for two when I heard the familiar knock. Mia's voice followed, bright and sweet. "Grandma, it's me." I opened the door to find her standing there with her backpack and a smile too big for her small frame. At 9 years old, she was already taller than I remembered her hair, in the same neat braid Tara always used to do for family gatherings. She handed me a small envelope before I could even say hello. "Mom said to give you this," she murmured. I tucked it into my pocket, knowing that letters often speak louder after tea. For now, I wanted to give her a morning worth remembering. We made pancakes together, the kitchen smelling like vanilla and sugar. She stirred the batter with exaggerated focused tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. "You're very serious about pancakes?" I teased. "Grandma," she said with mock authority, "good things take precision." I smiled at that. Precision had always been my language, too. After breakfast, we settled by the big oak table in my living room. The ledger lay open, its pages neat and filled with years of quiet observations. She stared at it curiously. "Is that your book of money things?" "Sort of," I said. "It's called a gratitude ledger. I write down the good things that people do and the things I do that make life a little lighter. It helps me see balance beyond numbers." Her eyes widened. "Can I have one too?" I handed her a small notebook from the drawer and a pen that had once belonged to her grandfather. "Here's your first page," I told her. "Write something you're thankful for today." She thought for a long time, then scribbled carefully, "Pancakes with Grandma." I felt something tighten in my chest, a warmth so simple it almost hurt. I wrote my own line beneath hers, "Breakfast with someone worth teaching." For the next hour, we filled the pages together, small things that might seem trivial but added up like interest over time. Her handwriting was messy, looping across the paper, but the sincerity was pure. Eventually, she looked up and asked the question I knew was coming. "Grandma, did Mom do something bad? The room seemed to still." I looked at her gentle face, her innocent confusion, and realized that the next words would draw a line between memory and lesson. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "She just forgot the math of kindness for a while. Sometimes adults make mistakes in their calculations, but mistakes can be corrected." She nodded slowly, as if weighing the concept. "Will you forgive her?" I reached for the envelope still in my pocket and placed it on the table. "Let's find out," I said. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Tara's, elegant but cautious. I opened it and unfolded the paper inside. The letter was brief but heavy with sincerity. "Lydia, I've had time to think. You didn't just balance a bill, you balanced me. I'm sorry for treating your kindness like credit. I see now that love doesn't mean unlimited withdrawals. I hope one day you can forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Tara." I read it twice before setting it down. The silence between us was gentle, like the pause before music starts again. Mia studied my face, waiting. "Well, Grandma." I picked up my pen, turned to the latest page in my ledger, and wrote slowly, "Forgiveness, partial payment received." She read it aloud and smiled. "Does that mean you forgave her a little?" "It means forgiveness is like saving," I said. "You add to it bit by bit until one day you realize it's enough." She seemed satisfied with that and went back to decorating her own ledger with stickers. Outside, the light had shifted, pouring through the curtains in golden slants. I made us both tea, mild for her and strong for me, and we sat quietly, the kind of silence that feels like healing instead of absence. She traced her finger along one of my old entries and said, "You have a lot of lines about respect." "I do," I replied. "It's the currency that never loses value." She grinned, like she understood. Later, we took a walk in the garden. The magnolia trees were blooming again, heavy with white petals. She ran ahead, laughing, while I followed at a slower pace. Watching her, I realized that balance wasn't about evening the score anymore. It was about ensuring the next generation never had to make the same corrections. When she ran back breathless, she slipped her little hand into mine. "Grandma, can I write something else in my ledger tonight?" "Of course," I said. "What will it be?" She looked thoughtful. "Forgiving is brave." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "That's the best entry you'll ever write." As evening fell, I tucked her into the guest bed, the same quilt I had stitched years ago, now tucked around her shoulders. She whispered goodnight, and before she drifted off, she said, "Mom said she's proud of you." I stood there a long moment, the words echoing in the quiet room. When I finally turned off the light and went back to my desk, I opened my ledger one last time. Below the note about forgiveness, I added a final line for the night. Generational balance achieved. Then I closed the book and smiled, the kind that comes only when every number, every memory finally adds up. The French Broad River shimmered under the last sweep of daylight, its surface carrying the reflections of streetlights, like soft lanterns drifting toward evening. The small restaurant by the river was quiet, a place that smelled faintly of cedar and lemon butter, the kind of place where stories found their gentle endings. George was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table near the window, with 2 glasses of water and that steady, familiar smile. He stood as I approached, pulling the chair for me, with a quiet grace that reminded me of a world that still believed in manners. "You look radiant, Lydia," he said, his voice low and kind. I smiled. "You're confusing confidence for radiance," I replied. "It's cheaper and lasts longer." He laughed, the sound low and easy, and the waiter appeared with menus neither of us really needed. We ordered the special grilled trout with herbs and a bottle of white wine that caught the light like summer glass. When the waiter left, George raised his glass slightly. "To debts and lessons paid in full," he said. The line caught me off guard, soft and sincere, but edged with humor. I lifted my own glass, and to interest earned, I added in peace. We clinked glasses gently, the sound delicate as forgiveness. For a moment, we simply sat in the comfort of shared quiet, watching the sun melt into the river. The water caught every hue, amber, violet, rose, and turned it into something fluid and forgiving. George asked about Mia, about how she was adjusting after everything. "She's good," I said. "She's learning that kindness is math. Add, don't subtract." He nodded, smiling. "I like that. Every generation should learn balance early." We talked about little things after that. The weather, old recipes books we had both half finished. He told me about his late wife, how she used to overtip every server because she believed generosity was an investment. I told him about my late husband, how he always said laughter was the best kind of compound interest. Between courses, the waiter refilled our glasses, and I caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, my face looked settled, not stern or cautious, just present. The ache that had once filled my chest had softened into something like gratitude. As dessert arrived, a shared slice of lemon tart, light and bright, George leaned back and said, "You know, I think peace might be the only thing that appreciates with age." I smiled at that, cutting a small piece of tart and letting the sweetness linger. "Peace and boundaries," I said. "The market value just keeps rising." He laughed again, the kind of laugh that felt like conversation itself could heal something. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo. The river carried the lights of passing cars, stretching them into golden ribbons across the water. I thought about how life had turned itself around, not through anger, but through clarity, not through shouting, but through quiet corrections. "Justice doesn't shout," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "It smiles quietly." George looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I think that's the truest thing I've heard all year." We finished our dessert lingering as the restaurant slowly emptied. A young couple at a nearby table held hands across their plates, whispering plans. An older man at the bar hummed to himself. The soft sound of dishes being cleared became the evening's heartbeat. When the check came, George reached for it, but I stopped him. "Let me," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I smiled. "Consider it interest on laughter." He chuckled, letting me win this one. As we stepped outside, the night air wrapped around us, cool and gentle. The river flowed beside us, the surface rippling with light. George offered his arm, and I took it more out of comfort than need. We walked slowly along the path, the sound of water blending with the hum of distant music from a nearby bar. You ever think he asked quietly that maybe the hard parts of life are just unpaid invoices for the wisdom we have now? I glanced at him, amused. That's the accountant's way to look at it. He grinned. "And you're the proof the balance eventually clears." I laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just learned when to stop writing new debts." We reached the bridge, the lights flickering above us like constellations misplaced just for us. I paused, leaning on the railing, watching the river curve away into the dark. George stood beside me, saying nothing, and that silence said everything. There was no need for declarations or promises. Some evenings didn't need conclusions, they just needed to end with calm. After a long pause, I said, "Thank you, George." "For what?" "For reminding me that peace isn't passive, it's earned." He nodded, eyes on the water. "And you, Lydia Harwell, have earned every bit of it." The night wind carried the scent of jasmine and wet stone. I breathed it in, feeling every page of the past settle quietly behind me. As we turned back toward the parking lot, I caught one last glimpse of our reflection on the river. Two figures walking side by side, framed by light and calm. It wasn't justice that filled me, then not even triumph. It was balance, pure and simple. 3 months passed like quiet pages, turning each day lighter than the one before. The air in Asheville had shifted into early spring, and the dogwoods along my street were in bloom again, their white petals falling like slow confetti across the sidewalk. I was at my kitchen table, balancing my morning coffee and the soft hum of the radio, when the phone rang. The name on the screen made my breath catch for a second. Evan. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but something inside me said it was time. I answered, my voice calm. "Hi, Mom," he said, and that word carried both distance and longing. His tone was different. No pretense, no defensiveness, just the weary honesty of someone who had walked too far from home. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," he continued. "Not the kind of sorry that fixes things, but the kind that admits I finally understand what I broke." There was silence on the line, and I could hear him breathe like someone trying not to drown. I let the moment stretch before answering. "I know," I said softly, "and I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't credit, Evan. It's cash only, and it doesn't include overdraft protection." He laughed a little through what sounded like tears. "Fair enough," he said. "You're always welcome here," I added. "Just bring your own wallet." That made him laugh again, a sound I hadn't heard in years. We talked a little longer about Mia, about work, about the weather, but every word carried the tone of rebuilding, like two people learning a language they used to speak fluently but forgot how to pronounce. When we hung up, I sat for a while, letting the quiet settle. There was no rush of triumph, no ache of regret, just a stillness that felt earned. That afternoon, the mail arrived. Among the bills and grocery flyers was a small, cream-colored envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Tara's neat, elegant, and hesitant in the way that apologies always are. Inside was a simple card. "Thank you for teaching us balance," it read. No signature, no embellishment. Just that one line. I held it for a long time, feeling both the irony and the grace of it. Maybe she finally understood that balance isn't about equality. It's about awareness. It's knowing what you owe, what you've paid, and what you must never borrow again. I placed the card in my ledger between the last 2 pages, then opened to the final blank one. The ink glided easily as I wrote the last line I'd ever need in that book. Account closed, respect credited. I underlined it once, then closed the cover, pressing my palm against the leather like sealing a chapter. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of the curtains. Outside, the world moved on the postman, passing a child laughing somewhere down the block, the wind carrying the scent of cut grass. I thought about all the versions of myself that had sat at that same table, grieving widow, patient mother, silent financier of someone else's pride, and realized none of them were gone. They had simply balanced out into someone whole. The ledger had never really been about money. It had been about truth, about recording what mattered so that nothing, no betrayal, no kindness, went unnoticed. As evening fell, I poured myself a small glass of wine and stepped onto the porch. The sky was painted in shades of copper and lavender, the kind of beauty that doesn't demand attention but receives it anyway. Across the street, lights began to flicker on in other homes. Families gathered, laughter drifted faintly, and I felt no bitterness, only peace. I raised my glass slightly toward the horizon, not in a toast, but in acknowledgement. Revenge isn't loud. Justice has a receipt, and I kept mine. The words weren't bitter. They were truth wrapped in humor, an accountant's way of saying the books were finally balanced. I took a slow sip, the taste crisp and clean like closure itself. Inside, the ledger rested on the table, its pages filled with numbers, notes, and lessons that had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with dignity. Maybe someday Mia would find it and learn that strength isn't measured in who wins the argument, but in who keeps their peace intact. I smiled at that thought, set down my glass, and turned off the porch light. The night was calm, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to count anything. Not apologies, not debts, not losses. Everything that needed to be recorded had been, and everything that remained was balance. Have you ever had to teach your family the real cost of respect? Tell me your story. I'm listening.